2 clap. Good evening. My name is Leslie Celine, and my name is Bridge, because the light in me wants to connect with the light in you. I was born on Ohlone land, and I currently reside in the land of the Cora, the Atitlan, and the Huichol. If you are listening to the sound of my voice, you are already somewhat hip to the situation. Over the past few years, you have learned to modify your language and to some degree your behavior, at least enough so that you haven't been canceled. This is an invitation to drop into a deeper level of understanding. My challenge to you is, are you content with just giving lip service to the alphabet soup, or are you serious about expanding your awareness? So I've invited these 2 women here so that we may define our terms and initiate what will be a lively conversation. We are talking about the nonverbal energy dynamics of unconscious racism. I'm gonna give you a few examples. Using a person of color as an energetic grounding cord for an entire group of people. Making a person of color the heart and soul of a room. Using people of color to add gravity and depth to a group or organization. Polite racism, and power differentials in interracial intimacy. So if that is juicy enough for you, stick around. Alicia Montgomery is a licensed clinical social worker. She has worked in Texas, New Mexico, and California for the past 20+ years. She is currently the Director of Learning and Education for a nonprofit in Oakland, California, directly leading anti-racist and social justice trainings for the past decade. She is also a witch, a priestess of Sekhmet, and an initiate of Ifa. Dr. Bernadette Martínez Hernández completed an MSc in computational logic and a PhD in artificial intelligence before tuning all her attention to consciousness inquiry, healing, and energy work. She has written on these topics and more recently about the impact of racism and the hoarding of privilege. She is a topil of a calpuli, that is a sergeant in a community sheltered by the conchero dancers, Mesa of Los Remedios in Cholula, Mexico. And each of them are available for private coaching sessions. They teach workshops and professional trainings, and they're available for public speaking engagements. So there will be links in the post, and this is your chance to honor them. Welcome.
Thank you.
Bernadette, it is so nice to meet you.
Yes, very nice to meet you. I want to say something about the question you asked me, that it was accidental, but there is no accidents, you know, like what kind of Mexico you live, you know, and I was like, yeah, I live in a vortex of it's a city that it was designed to serve the white man and to be openly racist towards indigenous people. It's the ancient land of the Cholula people that they were massacred by the Spaniards and the Tlaxcaltecas. And with regard with what Leslie was saying, I was just thinking of how these people, the Spaniards stole the land and they built a city and they pollute the water. They basically, there was poo running on the streets of my city until fairly recently. And yet the indigenous workers, especially during the first 100 years, I believe so, they were coming every day to work and they had to leave the city. So they had to come and basically be the heart of the city, be the functioning engine, the love and soul, but then they had to be out, expelled out to the outskirts or to their own villages. And this is a pattern that it's very present in this city, because sometimes I tell Leslie, like, you do not understand, you know, the shit that sometimes I observe here, because it's very different. In other areas of Mexico, this is not as intense. But in here, there is this proclivity of to reach for the top level and then push back, push down everybody else, whilst at the same time consuming their energy, consuming their love, consuming their you know, that vivir sabroso that Francia Marquez speaks of. In Cholula, that is the neighboring city, there is a pyramid, there are indigenous people that have been settled there for a very long time, and now people are moving there, you know, by droves. And they hate that they use cohetes and, you know, all the paraphernalia of their festivities. And they're like, oh, they should be more quiet. And I'm like, there again, you move there because it's beautiful, because you have these beautiful indigenous people who keep their tradition no matter what, and now they but you want to consume them, but you hope that they will leave the heart and the soul, and then they move away. So this is the pattern that I see, and the more I grow closer to those roots, because I'm assimilated, I'm a mestizo, that I have bits and pieces of the tribes that I belong to. But the more I'm like, no, hey, this is not correct, the more I'm like, oh, you too, you should be consumed too, since you are, you know, in their favor. You should be another person that we can consume. And it has, especially in this city, I've been retreating more and more from people because of the silent behaviors, the assumptions that, because I'm all in, you know, this is a trait of indigenous people, Black people, like, you say yes to something, you go 100%. And then everybody else is like, oh, that person went 100%, so I'll go about 20 and wait for that other person to carry my load. And so, yeah, I want to start with that.
Now that's beautiful. I really appreciate that, because I was thinking about the words that you were using. I'm like, yeah, it's just this consumption, it's this consumerism. Like our energy, our life force, our individuation of who we are, we're not consumable goods. And yet that is the way that people often will interact with us, right? As opposed to, you know, when we're in our own little collective, it's like, how do we all show up? How do we show up for each other? How do we create community? It's not about the take. For me, a lot of times it's about, how do I give? How do I weave? How do we building a heart together? How are we staying connected? How are we being able to be resilient? And that's something that I believe for many is something that they want to consume, right? It's not something that they feel like they own, well, because they don't ever get to a level of contentness. And that is actually something that I've been thinking a lot about, is like, when am I content? What brings a level of content to my being, you know? And it's not about consumables or products or, you know, merchandise or being able to own somebody else's. It's about claiming my own and being in connection with who I am, who are my ancestors, who's the community I'm engaged with, and what is the energy field that we're creating. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's super, like the word there, community. This is the stress. Like, I feel that when in situations where community is an afterthought, like, yeah, we're together, but this community thinking or considering what's happening, that, you know, moving our gaze from our centers to what's happening out there, where am I needed?
Yeah.
This is a trait that, at least for me, I had to train myself to remember how to do that, because I had it and then I lost it. And then I had it again, and it has been a game of like, yes, I have to have it. But then when I recovered it, it was like, I'll give it to about everybody. And then it's like, that's not also you know, in an ideal situation where everybody's on the same wavelength, this is perfect because everybody's like, just, you know, I want to be of service, use me. But whenever, you know, there are people who are not there and if they're unconscious about it, it's a lot of work to say, hey, this is not something I want to have around or whatever. It's so much work because they get, my experience has been it when I say things like that is like, oh my God, you know, causing division, you know, aggressive, you know, like and it's a burden for me because now I have to deal with their feelings. And I'm like, I don't really want to do that. I just want this not to happen.
Yeah, I like that because when I think about community, it's like we give because it's essential to us. It's part of who we are. It's what we want to do. It's how we connect. And we're not doing it for recognition or props or any of those things. It's an energetic exchange, right? And to recognize that I am actually getting something back from the exchange and the relationship. Again, not for some ulterior motive, but yet to the ulterior, if there is a motive, it is self-motivated for the connection, right?
Yeah.
And it's that energetic field that we create that allows us to, oh, okay, I can actually relax myself. I can feel into this. I don't have to be in a place of not feeling trust or trusted. And I think that is one thing that colonialism has really done a number on, right? We don't trust as readily. We don't, you know, there's got to be an ulterior motive. There's got to be a motivation behind it. It can't just be because we want to be in community. But I will say that I'm seeing more of a resurgence of that, specifically in communities of color. And that's just been like so beautiful to see. Even as my job right now, like the word networking, I hate that word, right? And I never had a use for it. I was like, this has got to be the, you know, God, I might have to have a drink before I have to go and network, right? But what has happened in the last couple of years, doing a lot of social justice trainings and talking and connecting, I find that I am reaching out and I am trying to build, not just build, but like weave that web to where, you know, myself and others are connected, because often what I'm finding is I'm a woman of color. Then I'm like, oh yes, here's this gentleman of color over here. And I feel like in some ways we're little islands in the sea of white supremacy culture. And we're weaving a connection so that we don't feel isolated, that we remember what it means and why we're doing this work. Because it's not something that I thought I wanted to wake up doing, to be perfectly honest, right? It just isn't. I finally was like, someone's got to do this, and I can do this between 8 and 5, you know? Yeah. And so I have no trouble saying that, you know, between 8 and 5, I'm happy. You have questions, I'm going to answer them, because that's the relationship that I've chosen, because we need to heal. Otherwise, we don't have like more communal liberation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's segregated and separated, and it's like, no, how do we actually work together to find a form of liberation that appeases and feeds our soul? And for me, it's like, okay, I can do that. Outside of that, I'm like, yeah, no, not lifting that I'm not lifting any of those things. I'm turning my phone off. And there's very few people that I am willing to have some of those conversations with, unless it feels like, oh, you see me and I see you, like we are right now. Right?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you speak and I feel water, like I'm in the ocean, having a very nice Caribbean, you know? Yeah. That is like, you know, really chill, and it's warm, and, you know, this is like, yeah, this is the physical sensation of community, at least for me, where I feel like my shoulders don't do this, and I don't, you know, unevertly do this, because I'm like, waiting for the heat.
Yeah.
Because I can say, oh, that doesn't feel good. And oh, what would be feel good? Usually when people do that, they blow my mind. I faint and I come back like, thank you for saying that. Because,
Yeah.
it's those little islands and isles that you mentioned. Yeah, it's just about growing them. And
Yeah.
my sense is that most people want that,
Mhm.
but we don't have the language, especially as an assimilated person who had to work her way back to a level of connection, a level of understanding of the roots and the ancestral lines that were running through me. And I'm just beginning.
Yeah.
It's difficult. We don't have the language. We only have what the culture, indoctrinates us. And for me, it's always important to try to come up with ways to express that to people. And it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And also it's frustrating when people don't understand how exhausting that job is, and they take it for granted. So when Leslie asked about this discussion, it's like, yeah, I wish more people understood that when I'm calmly saying I don't feel good doing this, I think this is happening. It took so much work for me to reach the point where I sound sane. And it's all the same to me. I can sound insane and I will express the same thing. But I'm doing it because I believe in community. And when I get answers like, oh, you're just projecting, or, I read something today that they were making fun, like when privileged people tell you, go and heal your trauma, you should hate them, and I was like, yeah, I fucking hate them. I was like, why? You have more privilege than me, way more. So shut the fuck up,
Right.
But, the effort that it takes to be like, I think you need to go and do your practices and then come back to me.
Right. And I'm just going to say, because they don't realize this, but we knew each other about 2 minutes before we started this conversation, right? Mm-hmm. But the ability to build that, it's like when you talked about, when you said, oh, I feel like I'm in water, I'm like, yes, it's so tranquil, right? Our conversation, I feel you. And that is what we're talking about. Like, I don't have to, it's not about the words. It's not even sometimes even about your body language, which, by the way, people forget is 80% of the conversation, right? It's about the energy exchange that we're having. And I'm like, oh, I'm completely with family. This feels comfortable, right? And for me, that is huge. The other thing I want to touch on is when you talk about, having to go back out and come back in, learning about your roots, your culture, and everything else. One of the things that I think that is for us a privilege as people of color is we actually know that we have roots. I do so many trainings and white people are like, oh, I'm white. And I'm like, that's the color on a board. Oh, I'm Caucasian. Oh, really? Your family's from the Caucasus region? They're like, what? I'm like, do you even understand the word Caucasian? Like you're assigning yourself a role energetically that you don't even know. And then they're like, oh, well, I'm not. I'm like, oh, I'm just, I've got a little Scandinavia. I'm like, have you been to Scandinavia? Do you know how deep the roots go there? Like people just have completely devalued their ancestry, and we embrace ours. And I think that's part of it because we know whose backs we're standing on. And it's not about toting a flag or any of that. It is really about seeping into our bones and understanding the trials and tribulations. Everyone has got trauma. I do a lot of trauma training, and we're all traumatized because someone along the line decided that colonialism was a good idea and that people needed to be oppressed in order for somebody else to maybe make money and chase the almighty dollar. And we're still dealing with it. And I'm like, when are we going to figure out that human beings are more important than consumable goods? And until we learn that and value that first and foremost in ourselves, how are we going to do that with others? Yeah.
It's when you said that last part is like valuing other people. And I feel that in order to value others, we have to value ourselves. and the yearning to value ourselves is hazardous one. When everything tells you you have no value unless you're oppressing somebody.
Right.
Because this is the thing, like, oh, you're an asshole, and but you're a CEO of a multi-million-dollar business.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're good, you're successful. And I'm like, no. This is you have value in that system.
Yeah.
And to come from the other direction where you have value because you are valuable, everything's valuable, and you deserve my attention and respect because things deserve that. And then we're not going to negotiate how much, because maybe you don't want that much, maybe I don't want to give that much, it doesn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
I already love you, I already feel that you're a good human being. But all that is like, they're not thinking that.
Yeah.
And then I have to learn to say, I want to play as if they were in my wavelength, and they're not.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think internally, I don't like puzzles in, games in general. But when I do that, I can feel how my entire being goes, okay, this is a different game. How we're going to approach that, how we're going to say something that is going to go there, especially if I notice because there are people I've noticed that they just don't want it, maybe not in this lifetime. And then I don't bother with them. But the ones who I just see a tiny inkling, like, I'm here and there, I want it, but I don't know how to. I can feel my being elating, like, oh, I'm just going to figure out a way to give it something, and maybe run away afterwards because, maybe you're not going to like it. But it makes me feel alive. And when you describe connection and community, you're giving me the same feeling, of creating that something that is very invisible to most people, but not to everybody. And it's a joyful thing to meet somebody like you, to somebody like Leslie, when they see us, oh, I know what you're doing there, and you're dancing this.
So good. When Leslie first asked me about this conversation, I was thinking about an experience. So I grew up in Texas, and so there's a culture there that is obviously completely oppressive, and there's and now I live in California. And one of the things I always say is, well, we still knew who wanted to hurt me there, right? I knew who wanted to lynch me or cause harm. Whereas moving up north, people think, they're woke, but it's like, no, you're just incognito with your bullshit. And so when I went to Scandinavia the first time, and I was walking down the street, and people were looking at me, and I was like, this is so weird. They're looking at me because they actually have not ever really seen a Black person walking down the street, right? They were looking at me with this fascination and curiosity that I had never felt before. Just when I was like 16, 17 years old. And I was like, oh, that is a completely different energy. And so from there, I've been like, what is the energy that I'm receiving? And do I need to block it off? Because in the South, I had to block a lot of things off. You just have to, right? Or you get used to it, you get numb to it. It's like you're driving with the top down, right? The sheer wind factor. But when you think about it, it's like, what is the energy we're exchanging? What is it that you're putting out? Are you fearful? Are you scared of me? And if so, why? Right? Like, what do I present that's so damn scary? Because I'm competent? Because I'm attractive? Because I'm, smart? Like, does that make me any different than anybody else that could potentially go and get educated in particular ways? But, so that's like, but I had a good conversation with a friend the other day, and she was talking about all these things. And I said, oh, this other person, I think they're scared because you're confident, you're competent, and they can't imagine that you're actually comfortable and not trying to take their job, that you actually are exactly where you want to be where you said you wanted to be. and that can't be enough. And it's like, of course it can be enough, but there's this way in which Western civilization and colonialism has made this level of competitiveness that people can't hardly see each other, right? There's got to be an ulterior motive.
Yeah.
And so, I think that gets in the way of a clear energetic exchange.
Yeah. The distrust to every interaction that is very unconscious, but always there.
Yeah.
And for me, it irritates me because it immediately I go like, what is this? And there is a part of me that just I had to relearn to block everything.
Yeah.
When I came back to Mexico, because my tool of choice when I was younger was dissociation, and I could no longer do that. So I had to learn to just disappear in the background while I'm still here, but I'm not peering forward. Yeah. And that experience you mentioned in Scandinavia had a similar one where I can say that open racism, where I was, shouted out, or, somebody expressed something that was blatantly racist. For me, it only happened in Germany and in Scandinavia. Even though I live in Britain and in Holland, because I live in major cities and also in a university town, that didn't really happen, or I saw it happen to other people, but because I'm not so dark, I blend with the crowd.
Right.
But I'm definitely I'm not white enough for Scandinavia.
Yeah.
Because I went to a sauna where I was naked, and it was freaky because I was the darkest person in the entire sauna, and everybody was naked. And I remember clearly feeling like this is weird. My brain is saying no, and then an incident happened there. But it's all these elements of energetics. I'm fascinated by how you very determined, you go back to the energy. And I start thinking about the distrust, the energy of the distrust, being distrustful of people. And I think again about my city, because it's the school I lived in for 23 years. And until very recently, for me, churches in my city were just churches, and there are tons of churches here, like so many. And I attended a conference and somebody was saying, you have to think that all the churches here look like fortresses. And I was like, yeah, I remember thinking about that as a child. And it's because, they were afraid. They were always afraid. So, what if the indigenous people, we're only like 10%, white Spaniards. What if the indigenous come and attack us so we can go to the church and lock ourselves in? And I was like, fuck, this is such a mind fuck. Because the entire, there's so many churches and they all look like that. And you're getting this message of distrust. Enter the church, and rather than feel connected to whatever spirituality they're trying to offer, it's like, you're here because this is the fortress of protection. So do I feel like, connected and trustful of people? No, clearly, I never felt like that in a church. I never thought that Christianity or Jesus had anything to offer until I stepped out of that mindset. And then somebody else told me, oh, no, that's not what we mean. And I'm like, oh, okay.
It's so funny because I actually, when you say that, I think about, I was raised Roman Catholic, but there were more statues of San Martín in the house than there were Jesus. And so for me, I was like, oh, well, yes, that works, right? So I'm like, he reflects me.
Yeah.
So I never thought about it that much because, I'm good with Jesus, and but he's not the main dude for me. He can be and can't be, right? So, but it is interesting because, yeah, you're right. There was no reflection, and I'm like, why is that? Why did they need to do that? But that is that's a fear thing, right?
Yeah. And it's at the core of many. I lived in England where politeness is the currency.
Yes.
but it's violent politeness.
Yes.
I was describing this to my brother, and I said, I learned to navigate that. I became very skilled, and that skill doesn't work here. But, I could just with a blink and, the way I move,
Mm-hmm.
convey things that
Mm-hmm.
people couldn't mess up with me.
Yes.
Because there, it's all very it's delightful. But
Yes.
pass me the salt. I give always that example, can you feel the violence of a lot of the words? And
Yes.
in here, my city is very similar, it's still Mexico and it's different, but there is a lot of verbal violence that is masked in politeness.
Yes.
And going back to the reflection about being the heart of the room, being the thing that is moving something, it's the undertone of assumption that that's your role, that you're in here to amuse us, you're a rarity or an oddity, that we want to prod and poke. And it's
Right.
fuck.
Yeah. My job is not to speak for all people of color ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to be reflective, and it's not to be whatever. And that's a very interesting thing, because I know that I have definitely been put in those positions, and it's been very interesting when other people have called others on it, and it's like, that is not her role. And I'm like, I'm sorry, damn, did that just really happen? Like, that's happened to me like once or twice in my life, and it always shocks me,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm like, oh, I don't have to open my mouth. What a concept, right? Because we are put in that center. We're supposed to do one thing, and then we also have to explain it, and we have to explain forever. And I'm like, y'all have lost your mind. That's too exhausting, And so, there are ways that, like for me, coping, it's like, oh, well, it's easier for me to apologize than ask permission. That's been one of my biggest rules, because it's too hard to navigate the systems that are in place, the hypocrisy, right? The bullshit. And it's like, oh, I love that favoritism over there, but it's not actually being spread around like peanut butter. Could we share some of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, what are the things that I need to do to make sure that I stay resourced as much as possible and at all times? And so, I think about that in the roles that I've taken on for different types of employment or working with other people. I don't chase people. I just refuse to. I'm here. I am solidly here. When you're ready, I'm here. Feel free to come and get me. Otherwise, most people are like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, let's get together. Okay, great. This is, community is very different. The rest, I'm just like, I don't have that energy anymore. And I'm glad I've gotten here, to be perfectly honest, because it's so tiring, especially when you're talking about all of the verbal, the nonverbal, the twisting ourselves in knots in order to try and explain something that should be one sentence, but I have to make it 5 paragraphs in order for me to get the point across, and for you not to light on fire with your pants or something and act like, like I've assaulted you. Yeah.
But I like what you said there, it should be a sentence that you go on and digest.
Yeah.
Do what you need to do and then come back with an answer or an adjustment or whatever.
Yeah.
But it is a navigation of it. I had an idea and I flew. There was something I wanted to say and I completely forgot. So, if it comes back. Oh, it was about chasing people. I will say that because I was assimilated. So it's so funny because I have all those kind of little prisms. I can see things,
Yeah.
And I see my behavior when I was in what could be considered the top of a life. I was youngish, I was 30, 31, 32. I had a very well-paid job. I lived in London, I was just going out with friends, traveling, and the behavior I had towards other people. And then seeing my own transformation and then moving not only to being more connected to my roots, but also to become disabled because I spend so much energy managing shit I shouldn't. And then also being impoverished because my disability doesn't allow me to earn the money I was making so easily. And then seeing how the tables turn. Stand where they're at and be like, fuck, if somebody has said this to me 10 or 15 years ago, would I be able to listen, to understand what this person is saying? And the answer is probably not. Probably people said things to me and I was just like, the fuck's that? I don't know, I don't process what you're saying. And I was very arrogant, very, they're all, so I have a lot of compassion for people when they do that. They still piss me off, but I have a lot of understanding.
Yeah.
For that element, and the amount of work it took for me to get to the point where I've been in communities where, as you said, it was one word and you go and figure out, or somebody said to me a couple of sentences and I go and I had to figure it out and then come back. And the speed, the sheer speed of and efficiency of moving in that level of community, for me, it was mind-blowing. The amount of resources and everything that got worked there. And the challenge I have is that I don't have something like that here. Everything I have like that is mostly online. And not to get discouraged or arrogant about, oh, guys, you're not like that. Like, no. I was there. If I could, somebody else can, And then relearning how to measure my energy, because something that I had mastered in a very Occidental environment, as is England, doesn't work here. I cannot pull the same tricks. I had to relearn an entire new level and communicate things that maybe in English, I'll be quick to say, like, this is not okay. And in here, is that I arrive to a party and I'm drained in a minute. And I don't understand what happened. And just, I have to go back and say, what did I, and then, a week ago when I decided I was coming, I should have gone. I knew it and I just ignored it.
Yeah. Understanding that piece of intuition is so critical, right? Because that's part of our energy field saying, no, right? We need, there needs to be more reserve or what have you. I think about, because language is not, our communication, I should say, is not always about language. And how to, what is the energetic cost? What is the emotional lift when we're trying to work with others and communicate, right? And so are we, and I do this in my trainings, like, do you actually have the energy to engage in some of the conversations that you're wanting to? Or do you know what, because you don't know what you're getting yourself into when you start a conversation. And are you willing to sit through it or stay through it, right? Because there are plenty of conversations I start that I'm like, oh, this is incredibly painful. It's not energetically exhausting, but it's painful because, there's a learning in it. And so I'm sitting there with it and I'm like, yes, I'm still here, but it's like my body is shedding, right? Whether I'm crying or sweating or what have you. And so there's this transformation. And so at this point in my life, I'm very conservative in regards to the levels and the amount of different conversations I'm willing to engage in, and I not just learned to say no, but I've also learned to ignore. And I don't mean it in a negative push away, but it's like, oh yeah, no, I don't need to engage in that, right? And not judge myself around that. Because what ends up happening, I realize, is that if the conversations are meant to be, they come back around and people will come back and we end up having more of the conversation. I always think about like this one intern I was talking with about 2 years ago, And I told him something that he didn't want to hear, which was basically you need to go home and be with your mother. And they were trying to buckle up and be there and do this. And I was like, really? And so I just said it. And so I'm like, if this is where you really feel like you need to be, then okay, that's fine. But I, just saying. And so they got up and they left and they went home. And they came back later on, a couple of days later, and they said, okay. I said, how's your mom? "Oh, it's great. I'm doing better." And I'm like, how are you feeling towards me? I'm really angry. I said, yeah. You want to talk about it? Okay. Right. But it was really powerful because they literally did have to project their anger at me for the decision they had made to not be with their mother. And I had to tell them, you take your ass home to your mother and go sit beside her when she's not feeling well. When you're this worried, you can't really focus. Right. And so some people, that's really uncomfortable. And they're like, who do you think you are? Well, I think I'm me. I don't have all the wisdom in the world, but I'm going to say that I have some common sense. That's one of the things I was raised with a lot of. And I'm going to share that. And if you can take it or you cannot take it. And that's part of the energy exchange. And so I don't know that I've had other people that have resented when I said something as simple as like, really, you want to do that? And have people think of, it's like, my job is not to hurt other people or to tell them what to do. I don't care. You're going to make your own choices. I did not raise you. Didn't give birth to you. So go do what you need to do. Right. But I care. Therefore, I wanted to do this energy exchange, and you're going to take it or you're not. And that's in a teaching environment. Right. And so when we're out in the rest of the world, you're absolutely right. There are places where we cannot hear. Right? We're not ready to hear. And that has a lot to do with our developmental stages of where we are. But what I will say is that the thing that's helped me the most is my ability to trust my gut. Right? Or my spiritual journey. And that guide that has been supporting me, or those guides that have been supporting me, those ancestors, all of that have helped me go, no, or are you kidding? Right? You're like, oh, okay. And sometimes I listen and sometimes I don't. But if we don't do those things, then, we get lessons harder than we need to sometimes. I'm tired of having the hard lessons.
Yeah. High five about that. Because it's like, yeah. I had to take the decision to quit. Learning, in the roller coaster. There are a couple of things that sounded very important to me, because you said something like, I do things because not because I want to hurt you, it's because there's something in me who wants to serve the energy. You didn't say it exactly like that, but that's how I felt it.
Yeah.
And tying that with the distrust, that a lot of exchanges in, the mainstream normal people are not because they want to serve. It's just there is always this, maybe I'll poke you or I'll hurt you. And then coming from a location that is not the same is often misunderstood. But as you said, I'm not your mother, you're going to do whatever you want to do. And just to get that level of clarity of how an energetic interaction goes. For me, it got clear when as I started thinking of cells, like it's just you have boundaries that are permeable. There are things that come in and out, but you don't have to break the blood barrier. You can just go and exchange stuff and peacefully go your own way. And it's so beautiful when that happens. I remember when it started happening to me, I would be like, oh my God, this is what I was looking for all my life. And now that I have it, I just want it more and more, because there is this thing that I cannot even name, but when you speak, I feel my body vibrating. And I know you're saying something, but something else is also going. And I feel that moving me. And I'm like, this is just the force of creation. moving through us, and it's just flowing, and makes me very happy and very trippy. and it's all I want. It's like there are so many beautiful venues to express this, to play with it, to see what happens. Placing anybody who has that capacity at the core of the ransacking is such a disservice. And it takes a lot of skill to break that in communities. That's my experience. And I know, remembering something that Leslie and I heard in another conversation about an Asian woman that was basically used as like, oh, we're going to see a curious thing. It's, I don't know, I just want to express the frustration that is, it was frustrating for me to hear that. It's frustrating to me to be in this position when there are not many of us. I'm on my own. And then I know I don't like the climatic elements of learning. And I don't consider that climatic, but still it's a moment of learning, like, how did I allow myself to be back in this location where people don't hear me, don't understand what I'm saying, don't look after me. I've given my yes. What else do you want? And you want more.
Right.
And like, I'm sorry, and then go to the painful, oh, I need to step back and maybe still be in that community that is an ACE community, but also understand where I've just went 0 to 100. And that's part of my nature, and there is nothing wrong with that. But maybe in this occasion, I needed to go 0 to 50%, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting when you were talking about you were back in the same situation. I had a friend about 20 years ago that told me the lesson's repeated until it is learned. And I always think about that onion, and I'm like, oh, snap, really? I'm here again? God, I hate this one. Please let me learn this one this time, right? But there's a whole lot of energy that goes into recreating and really dialoguing within our own souls and beings, not in this part of us, but in the whole part of us. What's I going to say? There was something I was going to say. I think for me, one of the things that's been really important has been my ability to slow down, not just to hear others, but to hear myself. What is my intuition? What is my energy putting off? What am I, what am I giving off? What am I receiving? And so, oftentimes, especially when I'm in a training mode, specifically like more one-on-one, I'm like, I like to tell people, this is my background. This is, and I scare people sometimes because I'm really direct. And I can't do anything about that. That's their perception of me. But, it's like they start out terrified. And at the end, they just like, I'm so going to miss you. And I thought, I need you to remember how scared you were when you first met me. Right? So that you can actually understand that about you and about other people and what that energy exchange is. I have big energy. I'm not apologizing. I'm not trying to make it small anymore. That shit was exhausting. Right?
Yeah. So
it's like, this is who I am, and I'm full of love. I literally had a friend that I worked with for a year on an art project together. And afterwards, she kind of disappeared, and I contacted her and I said, just checking up, what's going on? She says, the way you love scares me. And I was like, damn, she can't receive it. I can't do anything about that.
Yeah.
Right? Because she was looking for something that she could do to reciprocate for the experience that she had had. But she doesn't understand the experience that we shared was everything. I needed nothing else from her. Nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I just feel it, and I'm like, yeah, this is it. It's a in an experience where your energy and your field is so vast and so generous and so calm, because it's a very calming field. The way I perceive you is like your only choice is to jump in And I know we have been taught not to jump in and to be afraid of that.
Yeah.
But this is, it's scary. But,
Yeah.
I promise, the sea that is going to receive you is going to be so chill. And you're just going to be floating for several hours,
Right.
letting the sea take you.
And that's how I feel with you too. It's so funny
Oh,
though,
thank
but
you.
you're right. We are taught, oh, you got to test the waters on, if it's an intimate partner, take a little bit of time. That's okay. But relationships are built on creating trust, and through that energetic exchange. And my parents actually met and were married within 3 months. So right. So I've always believed in whirlwind romances and the concept of meeting somebody in that energy exchange, right? How to do, like, I have one sister that's been married for 30 and another one that's been married for 40 years. I'm like, God, that's lifetimes, right? And so it's beautiful to be able to see like what we can do with our energies when we choose, but it's literally, that part is literally the choice. Do we choose to jump in? Do we choose to open ourselves up so that like I could feel your energy and go, oh, this is glorious, right? Like I don't have to think twice. I just can, but that's the heart opening.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not that hippy dippy stuff either. Let me be clear on that shit.
Yeah.
Right. When we're talking about community, right? It's not that weird fake shit that's hippy dippy. It's community is heart and energy. Because I know that if we were standing next to each other and you said, pass this, I would be passing it. And vice versa. Right? I need help. Can you help me dig this trench? Yeah, okay. Right. Not like, oh no, my manicure, I can't, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that. We're going to feel each other. And I think that's the other thing, because, we laugh about it, but dogs walk up and sniff each other's butts, right? But they're checking each other out and they're connecting. And we don't need to smell each other's butts, but we do need to sniff each other's energy and open up. And you can't do that if you're not willing to show your ass a little bit.
Yes. It's your heart is where your ass is.
Oh, God.
But it is so true what you're saying, it's we don't have any protocols to say, oh, I would love that you could open your heart to me a bit more so I could feel you. I had a community where that was a normal thing to say. But, outside of that, if I go and I say that, people are like, what the hell, are you crazy?
Yeah.
And it's like, I just want to get to know you, but I look like a Myra, I want to love you. And it's like, yeah, I'm a bit like that, but I just want I want to get to know you, and it really irritates me and it gets me agitated when all I can feel is fear and mistrust and protection, because that immediately sends me alarm bells to say, oh, I need to just be mindful of this and be a bit far, because if I go, you're just gonna punch me. And know that of being an ass. It's just, there is not enough information between us to have that context that will help this connection.
Yes, absolutely. We don't need we don't have an external context to tell us this. It's a felt and a connected experience. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I hate to say it. Yeah, I hate to say this, but I have an appointment I have to go to.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you. I just like, my heart is leaping out of my chest. And for anyone listening, we've got another video next week about the body mechanics of power differentials. So another, it's about nonverbal communication. And there we will ask the age-old question, has anyone really read Wilhelm Reich's Mass Psychology of fascism. Thank you. And we'll see you
Bye-bye.
later. Love both of you. Ciao.
Love you.
Bye.